We can recite and sing. O chan ju sen be su tu ne ma cha mi cha cha pa me cha pa ni kya ma yin de ma cha mi cha cha pa me. So we already dealt with these in the context of generosity, so we aren't going to go through that, right? Yes, so we are into the Paramita of ethical conduct, and here the first obvious opposite will be that of unethical conduct, right? And then the rest easy to apply. So first, I wanted to make the case for how the ethical conduct in the Pratimoksha level and that of Bodhisattva level compare and contrast a little bit. So, just briefly, just to get a sense, right? So in terms of the category of ethical conduct, we speak of three categories of ethical conduct in the context of Bodhisattva, namely the ethic of restraint and ethic of virtue, ethic of altruism. Whereas in the case of the Pratimoksha level, of the three ethical conducts that we speak of in the Bodhisattva, it's primarily the first one, the ethics of restraint. Whereas in the Bodhisattva, the first and the next two gets added on. So from there, it's very clear that in the case of Pratimoksha practitioners, the thrust of their practice is to restrain from harming others. Actually, that's where the very basis of Buddha's logic, Buddha's case for how to build one's prospects for happiness and joy is that's the basic case that Buddha makes, how the prospect of joy and happiness should be grounded in, should kind of start out by restraining from harming others. And here, as simple as it may sound, it is very essential to understand that how we go about harming others. Harm is not just merely confined to external action, but rather where it is coming from in terms of the mental intention, mental motivation. So if we want to do a good job in really restraining ourselves from harming others, that's the area that we would eventually go and look and do the redressal. Only then we could do a better job of exercising restraint, and that's where the first assurance of joy and happiness and further increase of joy and happiness starts. And that's very evident in the stanza, which condenses the entirety of Buddha's teaching, where he begins with, "Do not commit non-virtuous actions," and then on the basis of that, then cultivate all perfect virtues you can. And then if you can even go further, then yes, thoroughly tame the mind. Thoroughly tame the mind in the sense that on top of building those qualities, one of restraint, another of spiritual qualities, positive qualities, then eventually you could go even thorough, more subtle, thorough into the nature of mind, into really the thorough nature of mind. Then that kind of substance the condenses the entirety of Buddha's teaching. There too, the order is very evident there. So it takes a while. It takes a special observation upon oneself by doing an experiment on oneself. How do we disturb our state of peace? How do we lose that? In what ways? When we give in to the disturbing elements within us in the form of destructive emotions, I call that dissonant mental states for klesha. Because klesha is not just only destructive emotions, it also has cognitive components from a Western usage of the term point of view. So it is dissonant mental states, be that in the form of emotions, destructive ones, or in the form of cognitive components that are distorted in their perspective, distorted in their mode of apprehension. The two combined kind of constitutes the very disturbing forces within us. So when we give in to harming someone, that's the first thing that we resort to. We kind of give in to those forces within us, and from there springs the harmful actions. So in the case of the Pratimoksha level, of the three types of ethical conduct we speak in the Bodhisattva context, the first one is the primary one. The first is the primary one, and it's only later in the Bodhisattva context that the two are added. Which is to say that at the Pratimoksha level, they engage in generosity, etc. Right? But the primary focus is to exercise restraint, and that too with individual liberation in mind, individual peace in mind, because that's what one at that level finds capable of doing. Kind of going at one's own pace of how, for now, that's what I can do, and focus on that. So even if it means doing something positive, like being compassionate, training in the Four Immeasurables, whatnot, but the main focus is for one's own development, for one's own training. In a way, even for Bodhisattva trainers, also that's where the order should lie, in first doing the job on oneself. Even though at the Bodhisattva level that could be infused with, that could be conjoined with a sense of helping others, but nonetheless limiting one's primary focus at the initial level to exercising restraint, and to focusing on improving oneself. And then in terms of the point of focus, I already touched on that. The point of focus is individual development, and the other at the Bodhisattva level is for the sake of others. So just about anything one does, the focus tends to be that different. And there's nothing wrong with that. In a way, even for a Bodhisattva also, no matter one may start out with meaning to benefit others, but in terms of actual doing that, actually executing that, that could take the form of primarily focusing on one's own development. Right? So in the Pratimoksha practice, it is very clearly captured there. And then shared and unshared. Shared and unshared in the sense that, in the case of Bodhisattva, shared in the sense that when it comes to compromising one's integrity, so to say, not integrity so much, compromising one's particular precept, at the risk of what do you call at creating a disservice to others, then they opt for benefiting others. They opt for avoiding that disservice, even at the cost of transgressing the Vinaya vow. But since that is done not out of self-interest but out of compassion, even that seeming transgression gets transformed. It is not a what do you call typical transgression that one would usually fall into out of one's own self-indulgence. So there is no contradiction, despite the apparent what do you call dichotomy there. But there is no contradiction in terms of staying put on the Buddha's initial what do you call initial proposition that be that promoting one's own peace and joy and that of promoting peace and joy of others, it has to be rooted in primarily first the exercise of restraint, and if possible on top of that then reaching out to others. So when we reach out to others in full awareness with strong ground of love and compassion, even if outwardly it may seem like what do you call transgressing a precept, whatnot, but in actuality it doesn't really go contrary to that, in that it still stays put. It doesn't contravene, it doesn't what do you call transgress the very fundamental basis upon which that Vinaya precept is founded, that of restraining from harm. That is maintained intact. On top of that, even a second layer of reaching out to others is being exercised here. So that's in that respect. Whereas at the Pratimoksha level, supposedly given one's lack of strength in the face of affliction and whatnot, so that there is the possibility, even if one may proceed to benefit someone, there is this danger, risk on the path of succumbing to some prior, afflictions there, and thus ending up doing whatever or not doing whatever it's in front of oneself, under the force of self-interest or under the force of affliction or whatnot. So that's why there the primary focus is to keep the precept as it is. Whereas in the case of Bodhisattvas, they weigh the pros and cons and would not have any difficulty upholding the service to others as a primary criteria. So in that aspect, it is called shared and unshared. Shared and unshared in the sense that what they do is shared by others. Permission, prohibition, we talked about that a little bit. In the case of Bodhisattvas, there's anything is done with genuine touch of compassion, there's no such thing that the outcome will be non-virtuous. So that's very clearly spoken in the Bodhisattvas precepts. And there too, say in the case of the first 7 non-virtuous actions, if Bodhisattvas with such a strong ground of love and compassion apparently incurs transgressing any one of those, there is a way of going about it. Supposing that Bodhisattva has any of the Pratimoksha vows, of the 7 non-virtuous actions, of the 4 root within that, except for lying, the 3 has to be first given back, only then engaged in the service of others, under the direction, force, influence of love and compassion. And it is very interesting to see why lying could be left out. That means lying has to have a deception at its root. So if you say somebody went there, you say it went there, it doesn't necessarily have to be a lie. It depends on what it is rooted in. If it is rooted in the sense of deception, then yes. Otherwise it is not. I remember very clearly looking into that in the Vinaya text, how it is explained. Yes, please.
Geshe, how could killing not have harming another at its very root?
Pardon?
How could killing someone not have at its very root an intention to harm in taking a life?
Yes. So in the scripture itself, when it explains anything done with genuine strength of compassion, there's no such thing that an outcome could be non-virtuous. It says, it also warns, don't take it lightly. This applies only to bodhisattvas at a very advanced stage, with strong, wealth of love and compassion, together with a wisdom that could see far further than the apparent. So capable of seeing their future, of how that would, whatever they are doing that is being stopped from, and that's the only option out, even at the risk of, if at all the bodhisattva were to fail, even at the risk of his or her own incurrence of non-virtue, but solely throwing himself or herself for the service of others with that, confidence of love and compassion, conjoined with the wisdom that sees far beyond the apparent. Otherwise, it says one could train in the aspiration but not execute that, not do that. It wants it very clearly. So, in a way, in such case, as I was saying yesterday also, in such case, even if the law of the land were to say, law of the land were to hold the bodhisattva culprit, the bodhisattva should be very willingly submit to that. Yet at the same time, be able to withstand, and maybe even in the court, be able to make a case also. Although I don't know how successfully or not, but at the same time, it need be. Otherwise, such a bodhisattva will not even care to make a case and then submit themselves to the law, yet at the same time, never ever suffer throughout because of the confidence and as well as their strength of what they are doing. Right? But there cannot be any way of, any way of pretension. No room of pretension should be left there. And if anyone does so, there is very great danger. Someone could just fake it up, saying, this is what it is and that's what I did. By being confident that how would people figure that out? Although it can be figured out if you watch someone over time. Yes, they could be exposed. If their practice, if their wealth of strength of love, compassion is sustained, then it could live up to the standard, live up to the expectation. Otherwise, it's just a matter of time for it to be exposed. In a way, in the scriptures also, when it speaks of how to infer someone of their inner qualities to which we don't have easy access, to which we don't have direct access, by observing their verbal and physical action, behavior, but that too over a period of time, for seeing the consistency, persistency, integrity, all of that. So anyway, so that's what permission and prohibition means. Expensiveness of result. And then yes, connected with that, I think we touched on that yesterday also, not just about taking somebody else's life, but giving one's own life. We come across such statement, right? But those are not to be taken literally or easily or lightly. Rather, that has to be contextualized in that someone who has reached that state of confidence, that level of confidence in really knowing without any kind of a confusion of what they are doing and with what kind of a level of awareness and love and compassion that they are doing. And then for whom such an act of, even if that be giving up one's life, would not have any, would not generate, as we decide, would not generate even the slightest sense of loss or slightest sense of what you call holding on to it. Only then that is advised to be executed. Otherwise, one could have the aspiration, train in the aspiration, but the scripture itself abandons, prevents someone from executing it. And then these topics we have to understand within the bigger paradigm. Within the bigger paradigm, right? Within the bigger worldview, where it is situated, and from that, then we could make a better appreciation of it. And then the expansiveness of result is dependent on the broadness, the broadness, the breadth of the mindset, right? Somebody may be seen doing the same thing, but how they do that, with what kind of a motivation, with what kind of a mindset they are doing, will make a difference in terms of how it affects others and how it affects oneself, more particularly the inner world. So, since they are expected to pursue just about anything with universal love, compassion, and bodhicitta, conjoined with the wisdom of understanding subtle dependent origination, then the strength of that action, the impact of that action, could be naturally understood to be much more expansive than someone pursuing that action with a relatively narrow, with more motivation. So that's how one could land to full awakening, another can land to individual liberation. More of abundance in a single individual. Supposing some person, oh yes. In the Tibetan context, we make this case of how do different codes of conduct in a single person abide. Say somebody starts out with a pratimoksha vow. Even in the case of pratimoksha vow, in stages of first taking a 5 precept lay vow or a lay vow, right? Neutral vow. 5 precept lay vow, and then from there to neutral ordained vow, and then into novice, and then into bhikshu or bhikshuni. And then further on with bodhisattva vow, and then even tantric vow. So the question is, how do these different precepts abide in a person? Do they get transmuted? Do they get transmuted? Do they get transmuted, or do they still maintain their individuality? So they are stand. Do they get transformed? Does the pratimoksha vow now becomes totally a bodhisattva vow, or does it eventually become tantric vow, and the person at any given time just has one vow, or different? So the Geshe, there are positions on both sides, and Atisha's position, which is the preferred one, is that no, they still maintain their individuality. That's the reason why we have references to someone holding 2 vows, 3 vows, right? So that's the reference to them. But then the question arises, the next one, in terms of, say, one particular conduct where one may be transgressing the lower vows, but could mean upholding the upper one, then what should get the priority? So obviously it is the upper vow, because in a way, as I said earlier, the upper vows do not contradict with the lesser one, because basically they are rooted in refraining from harm, to even on the basis of that benefiting them, to even benefiting them more thoroughly. So the letter of the precepts may be seen to be transgressed, but the spirit of the vows are never transgressed.
In today's day and age, you know, what you say about the Bodhisattva vows and so on, it's very true theoretically, but it seems to me in today's culture that it's often used as an excuse for bad behavior.
Definitely.
And so it seems to me there's a lot of confusion in people's mind about what this actually means. And it came up yesterday a bit. So I think it's also important to emphasize in this that we can observe our pratimoksha precepts with compassion for the benefit of others.
I see.
Because it always talks about going beyond the word of the pratimoksha precept to benefit others. But what about keeping them for the benefit of others? To make a good example of ethical conduct in a world where we look around and there's very little ethical conduct.
Yeah, I think, I fully agree. That's a very valid point that you're making. Yeah, it is a tricky area that has, it's a slippery slope, right? That the people who not necessarily starting out might not have meant bad, but succumb to their own weaknesses and whatnot, and get corrupted by the position, respect, etc., and might have succumbed to the same old afflictions within oneself that kind of pops up, right? Now is the time I should come out. Now that you have the position, power, etc., and they might get corrupted with it, and then may even on top of that, under the influence of these afflictions, may then abuse the position. So, as I was saying, in this age, everyone. The law of land cannot be expected to bend to these kind of understandings, to these kind of rules. And if someone, as I said earlier, if someone really, stood the test within themselves, then it should not be anything worrisome even. At the same time, it will serve the Dharma in that, yes, the actions get a befitting treatment. So I think as a community, we shouldn't have any doubt in allowing the law of the land to take over at any given situation, no matter who it may be. Because we should not worry if that person is genuine, whatnot. There will be nothing that they suffer from it. And the Dharma at large, one way or the other, would benefit from that. The light or the what do you call? Yes, the light of the Dharma will shine even brighter from such an outcome. So, I think in the course of such happenings, it would be good for us to kind of come up with a clear strategy. Like in such cases, this should not be questioned. This should happen. And then even allowing that this could be what in reality may be, but in terms of the the law of the land, there shouldn't be any second question of whether this deserves to be what do you call tested or not. So that's my stand, my understanding after thinking through that, keeping in mind how that is such a complex and ripe with possibilities of abuse kind of area. But we have seen in the face of actual controversies how some masters did come in defense. But they may have their own points, but I don't see that there should be any question whatsoever for any concern whatsoever for the land of the law of the land to take over.
Some of the things,
yes.
It's not an issue of the. Some of the transgressions, it's not an issue of breaking the law.
Mm-hmm.
It's an issue of doing what is not appropriate in a culture,
mm-hmm.
that or doing something that is actually harmful,
mm-hmm.
but it's not governed by the law of the
mm-hmm.
land.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I think a big example of that is sexual harassment.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people don't get arrested and imprisoned for it unless it goes to the extent of rape. But everything before that, the law doesn't govern. And
is that the case?
Yeah, but it's completely inappropriate behavior.
Is that the case that the law?
Yeah.
You'll get a restraining order, and if you violate the restraining order, you will go to jail.
Yeah, but you lose your job in the process. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So unless it's something serious like rape, that the law doesn't cover it.
Mm-hmm. I see.
In terms of doing something for the perpetrator.
Mm-hmm. I think at different universities, this is a very live topic, and they have several regulations in place. And I kind of got a sense that even the slightest inkling of harassment or assault could be reported and could be questioned and like that. It seemed like, because I read the document that was sent to all the staff members to kind of get acquainted with and be...
Title 9.
Pardon?
Title 9.
Yeah, I think that's it. Yes.
That may be happening right now.
Uh-huh.
But I have a friend who was a university vice president. Her partner was working in the counseling center.
Uh-huh.
And rapes at universities were ignored by the universities for decades in this country. It's only in the last... It's still happening now. We just had a presentation from Washington State University, and the young women coming to campus are like at risk. They're at 25% of them, I think, or something, or 1/3. It's a huge problem. And so what's happening now is just a small thing compared to the reality of what's happening. So this has been actually let go for decades.
Mm-hmm.
And so only now is, especially with the huge things that have happened, like at Michigan State, Ohio State, other places, there's more happening. It's in the limelight. But the reality for people is not that the law is protecting them, or the universities, or the police departments, or the physicians, or the priests, or the counselors. There's many people being harmed in this country, and they are not being protected by the law of the land.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not just universities.
Mm-hmm.
It's pervasive.
Yes, it is. Yeah. There's a comment from Tanya, and yes.
So when people are looking for scriptural examples of bodhisattvas, violating previous vows, I think we can look to the example of Tsongkhapa, who was a monk and also understood Tantra to the extreme, and he restrained from completing tantric rituals until after his death, and doing it in the bardal because he didn't want to violate his pratimoksha vows. So for some reason, that example never gets brought up.
I think Tsongkhapa signaled the advent of new era, and everyone should have taken a clue from that, which they didn't. I sometimes wonder what would Marpa do in this era if Marpa and Milarepa were to live together this time. I think even if he were to, or they were to go through the same thing, Marpa would have no question, no worry at all, going to the court and then serving the terms, whatever. But I may be stretching it out. Yeah. So, I mean, what I'm saying is that in the eyes of the world, there is no room to make this distinction of what may be subtly happening or what not, right? So it should be the same in the eyes of the law, and we as a community, should be very clear about that. I mean, we should have a clear-cut line of approach. That, I think, is very important. And to an extent, those who are not living up to the standard would be deterred by that kind of a what do you call stand. I think so. That's one way of what do you call keeping such things even mushrooming more.
Say that I think if Marpa and Milarepa were in this country, they would not do what they did in the past. Mm-hmm. Because the way it is in our country, I don't know about other countries very mm-hmm. much.
Yes.
But I have lived this country and seen a lot of it, and I've met people from all walks of life. Mm-hmm. From my work, I've met probably over 100,000 people in my 30 years in healthcare, mm-hmm. and listened to their stories, and I just don't think that they would find it suitable.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, I was kind of, what do you call, stretching it, saying even if they were to do it, that should be our stand. But as revered as they are, as wise and compassionate they are, they should as well be smart enough to cope with the time and the culture. And where does compassion and wisdom go, right? If it goes completely against the time and culture and era that they are in. Okay. Yeah. So then could be. It's good that we raised this topic, and at least some opinions got heard, and I think some kind of a what do you call combined stand is important, because then that will send a very strong message. And people should kind of have a clear idea of what entails from that, rather than have a divided stand, even on such things. Then I think that does more disservice to the Dharma, and nobody in the end benefits from that. Okay, could we go to the...
Restraint.
No, which one? Yeah, to the restraint, yes. Okay, so having made that case, so even as bodhisattvas, even as Bodhisattvas, they would have all these three levels of ethical conducts to observe, right? To observe and exercise. Thus, many of these topics will deal with the restraint part, or the virtue part, or the altruism part. Okay, for now it is the restraint part. The restraint part, in that Bodhisattvas, in exercising their ethic of restraint, are supposed to be even more alert to their situation, and instead of being put off by the unbecoming situation around, they should rise up to the occasion to even stand stronger. And for that, this image of lotus, always born in, I haven't seen lotus born on clean ground, maybe not, always born in mud. At least that's how the scriptures make use of this metaphor. But despite that, it is never ever soiled by the mud that it is coming out of. Likewise, with the force of mindfulness and introspection, right? With the force of mindfulness and introspection, one should be able to pull up an even stronger sense of discipline and restraint against the risks around. And then the next, and that's why in this context it speaks of bodhisattvas being born as householders, deliberately as sons, husbands, wives, etc., and then be perfectly capable of maintaining their integrity while at the same time benefiting their respective environment. So it should be an encouragement for every one of us, not just confined to the monks and nuns, the ordained ones, but even those who are in householders' life, to kind of take note of the situation they are in, kind of even seize that opportunity and feel hopeful that yes, maybe this is even a more promising ground to grow spiritually and test these things out for oneself. And then if one could see that come through in one situation, then one could get more and more encouraged and thus be able to really withstand the otherwise hindrances, yet at the same time be able to then address the situation better. We wish we could have such bodhisattvas in our political field also. Or there may be. Who knows? They are so skillful, right? Bodhisattvas are so skillful. The appearance is not what you look for. But we hope so. And that will come only when we deserve and when we earn. And yes, a pit cover or dike. So right now we are talking about the practice of restraint. So basically, why we have ordained or why we aspire on a spiritual path is basically, it should basically, directly or indirectly, boil down to putting up an antidote to the afflictions. That's where it should boil down to. Anything that contributes to growing affliction, that's clear sign. There shouldn't be any second thought whether this is dharma or not. That's very clear. So some areas of clarity is very important, and that's something that one has to work on and come up with. But sometimes it's very helpful to have a clear statement already made in the scriptures for us to kind of readily ponder on that and then kind of go from there in terms of whether we want to agree or not, to what extent, etc., etc. But that should be taken as a support to facilitate such clarity of mind. So this is one area where anything Dharma, at least from a Buddha's point of view, it has to be rooted in restraint against harming. And the seed of harm comes in the form of affliction rooted in distorted perception. So that should be very clear. Sometimes we may get carried away by saying, oh, this I'm doing for the sake of sentient beings, right? And don't care about how it is harming, how it is harming others, how it is growing, how it is augmenting one's own negativities within oneself, but get carried away by the facade of it and how one is capable of selling it to others and how others are taking it. That then becomes the whole story, and thus one ends up not doing Dharma but adharma to oneself and to others. So there is a need of checking once in a while in where it is contributing to. So the pit, cover, and dike, those are metaphors for how to deal with the afflictions. Pit, cover, like when there is a pit with dirt within, and if it's kept open, the odor would come out and spread. So in such case, cover it up. So that's like dealing with the afflictions within oneself. If we are not so clear where this is coming from, what an external condition is triggering it or not, but nonetheless, if through one's own imagination or whatnot, if some affliction is coming on, that's where one should try the means of dealing from within by covering up. By covering up through the tools, no other than mindfulness and introspection. By not giving the afflictions any chance of, if possible, preempting them, if not, even after they have come about. Apply mindfulness and introspection in mitigating the strength or the force of that. Now, in terms of, in terms of triggers from outside, somehow, because of the lack of strength, or because of lack of inner strength, or because of some kind of a habituation, so strong habituation built within, that somehow there are some external conditions that no matter how much one may try, at least at that particular stage, one succumbs to the afflictions or not, then come up with a means by which one could deal with the external condition itself. Although in the ultimate, it's not the external condition that should completely matter, but somehow one's weaknesses, susceptibility is such that one is not able to face that up and withstand that. Then there should be means by which one should arise to the. One should have the presence of mind in trying a way of looking at that situation. So apparently. In the scriptures, if it is an attachment or it is an anger, whatnot, try to see that person or to see that situation, whatever, in a different light by trying to use different rationalities that may help. So that's like serving like a dike in the sense that it controls it before it enters into oneself. So it's not so much like putting a cover on the pit, but rather putting a dike or let the water run through that so that its strength or its is restrained from outside. So that would take the form of trying to project, trying to bring another perspective to the thing and then see if that has an effect on that. And then the third is marme, a lamp. Without a lamp or without light, even in daylight, some corners of the room would still be dark. And even if it is in the middle of the day, if one happens to be going into the room, there's possibility of stumbling and falling in those areas, right? So it's So it's good to always, even in daylight, also carry a light with you. Even if it's in the middle of the day, when you could be looking at something where it's dark, sun doesn't get there. Use your flashlight and then look what is there. So that's the meaning here, where the lamp the lamp is likened to our constant companion of mindfulness and introspection. I think I must have shared it. I don't miss out on that. On the Facebook, the first page that you open, it says, "What's on your mind?" Now you remember, right? I always am tempted to say, "My mind." I have my mind on my mind. That must have been meant to be, right? And it rhymes so well. My mind on my mind. Wow. I mean, that's where one should be directing one's attention to. Look into one's mind. That's a control system. If we could control there, we can really feel in charge, no matter what. In any situation, that's one area where we can and we should and we must make effort into doing and making it a habit. Make it a habit to come back to the mind again and again and again. One habit. It's almost like this one habit can really go a long way. And then be equipped with. Try to have a mindfulness tool with you in terms of what to do in a particular situation. Once you have looked into the mind and you see the mind in different shades and different forms, whatnot. Now reach into your mindfulness tool. Say, what needs to be done in such situation when the mind is in that situation? What needs to be done in that? Merely watching and knowing what is going through is not enough. Usually mindfulness is being taught like, oh, just be present and that's all it takes. No. You can be very angry and now you know, I'm very angry, okay, I'm very angry, and then you go about doing whatever you want to do, then that's not going to have any better effect. You might even end up feeling very bad, saying, oh, I saw myself being very angry, even saw myself really damaging, whatnot. But I was very, very aware. That's the first step. Usually we always team mindfulness with introspection. Not just mindfulness. We don't let just mindfulness go by itself. Oh, mindfulness, eventually it could. But in the initial and even further along, it should be always teamed up with introspection. It's almost like be mindful, but carry your mindfulness tool or introspection tool with you. With tools to reach out to, so that you could fix the different mind states. And I think it cannot be mere coincidence why this introspection, something that we call introspection, samjhana, in Tibetan is called Geshe. Literally, Geshe means accordingly acting out as you saw. Geshe. Not knowing accordingly. Or you could say, okay, but I understand it as acting out accordingly as you have seen what has happened by the virtue of mindfulness. So having been mindful, trying to be mindful, and then whenever we find a let up in there, the introspection catches, and then comes up with whatever appropriate measures need to be taken. So yes, like a lamp. So even in broad daylight, we need to carry lamp. There can still be darknesses that escapes that, particularly in the mind. Oh yeah. Or else, in another sense, the lamp metaphor is used to, in the case of a precept holder, to know what one's precepts are. How does one transgress them? How does one make up for that? Kind of carrying the light of study and light of reflection, and be always ready to apply that in the particular situations. So that's how it is used there. And then the next is medicine. But basically it is again mentioning what the medicine is about, right? It's to deal with the illness. And in terms of the medicine, the appropriateness of the dosage, the nature of the medicine has to cope with the illness that one has. One cannot just merely go for anything by the name of medicine and apply this to one's illness. It may not fit. So likewise is the case. One has to be cognizant of the level of integrity that one has, the level of strength one has, and according to that, one has to deal with the illnesses accordingly. So particularly here it is saying, look for the in the case of maintaining morality, look for the gross transgressions first. And in the case of generosity, start from giving small. But in terms of morality, start from watching out for gross transgressions and apply the antidotes accordingly. And then the next one is diet for chronically ill. And here also it's similar in that for a chronically ill person who has a limited level of digestion, etc., one has to be very watchful of what one is taking, before taking something that's in front of oneself. One should not be carried away by the mere look of the things, etc., but rather check very carefully whether it suits one's situation or not, whether one can, digest it or not. So one has to check whether it is harmful to oneself or not, whether one can digest this or not. And this is particularly presented in the context of what one eats, right? One has to eat just the right amount at the right time, just as we say this, include this in our put prayer. It has to really maintain control over the amount we eat, so that what we eat, what we ingest, doesn't cause us to either engage in non-dharma action or miss out on dharmic practices. Like eating too much can put us into sleep, right? Or it will take too much of our time, right? We have to somehow limit to what we eat. That's why I think in Vinaya, snacking is not so much appreciated. You kind of eat at one particular time, and that too the right amount, right? And it is really marvelous if one could keep the Vinaya precept binding to all Vinaya practitioners of staying away from untimely meal, because when we do that, we get more time for study, practice, whatnot. We feel lighter, and we go to bed earlier. We can do that, and then that means rising up the next morning. It's very smart and judicious way of using one's time. So, when I was doing the Goenka's Vipassana practice, I jumped into the opportunity. Now that I have fellow retreatants doing it, I said, why not fit in there? It's very easy. Would kind of limit to when you go to bed, etc. So it was very easy. Likewise, I'm trying to make use of the company here in staying through that. It wasn't a problem at all. I did that yesterday. I said, oh, it was very good. But then, and when I went to retreat, I came out during that time, and I came out kind of determined to stay put like this. And then I was traveling in Varanasi and then traveling in Delhi. In some cases, the areas where I was in, the hotels do not open until later in the day. Although there should not be an excuse, right? One should definitely find ways, even if one may be traveling or not. But it's a little difficult. But anyway, no excuses for that. Transgression is transgression. And yes, I acknowledge that I regularly, but from now on there will be change. But regularly, yeah, regularly I've been including that in my confession. But it's quite tricky. You do that knowingly, right? Then how doesn't that fall into knowingly ketuseba, knowingly transgressing it? It's very difficult. Anyway, sorry. What else? Yeah, we need to. Yes, what's the? Oh yeah, the herdsman's cloth. The herdsman's cloth, or it could be women's cloth. So this deals with restraint with regard to the clothes that we wear. We shouldn't fall into any of the two extremes of either wearing total rags, or wearing every time wearing tip-top clothes, because that can get us carried away, take all of our time, attention, and could also corrupt our mind, and that will attract others' attention. If you are in either of the extremes, people will watch and look and whatnot. You get so much of unwanted distractions. But when you just wear a mediocre cloth, nobody will care. Ooh, you just go freely. What else? Please. This is taking so long. Yeah, shepherd. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Dealing with enemy. Oh yeah, when it comes to dealing with enemy, we be very, very strategic. Thinking of all the measures, right? We'll try to strike him or her from all corners. That should be the approach of ours in dealing with afflictions, not just merely content with one way, so that eventually the afflictions build resistance, saying this is the only way, this is the only direction from which the antidote comes. Next time I will go here, like the bacteria do, right? They build the resistance eventually. So we have to be as strategic as we would usually, or as someone would usually do with enemies, kind of always being on the guard and kind of trying out all means. Likewise, this affliction needs to be attacked. This affliction is one thing that you can harm, and it will not break any rule. And that this affliction is the root of our problem. Yet we have given it the core of our heart as a place for it. It's like it gets the very, the most cozy, secure place within us. Yet all it does is distraction. We have to recognize that. And it is constantly conspiring to harm us. Right? It is constantly conspiring to harm us. It remains in the very core of our being, and it brings all of the unwanted situations. So that kind of a recognition should be built as we go about our observance of precepts, and thus exercise restraints against the temptations of the afflictions. And then the next one is frequent renunciation. We need to be spiritually, we need to be principally taking ordination again and again and again. As I mentioned yesterday, we may over time lose that freshness of sense of what is important, what is not, and eventually again go back into the same habit of again being caring more possession, name, etc., caring more about how others, what one's fame, name, etc. is, and then, but eventually, more importantly, fall for our attachment, and yet build another household, right? Because we're supposed to have come from house to home to homelessness, but then we build another home, right? So it is, as I said earlier, it is metaphorical in that it doesn't necessarily have to mean that we do not possess things. So more particularly as a group, as a community, there's the need of building that. But in terms of one's attitude towards whatever one owns or the community owns, one should have that attitude like that of a bodhisattva. Like, so long as it is with you, you use it properly. If somebody finds the use for that, when somebody takes, says, okay, that has found the use for it. Like that. Okay. Whereas if we don't guard our mind, we can fall into our own bad habit of like a dog meets with meat, right? And even if not all dogs do that, but in the East, it may be due to the case that not many people own pets and they are on their own. Thus, there is no such time that the dogs are fed. So every time you look at them, they're always hungry. So their reaction to food is always going to get whatever. So maybe that's where this is pulled out, saying there is no such thing that they are satisfied. They no more look for the food. So likewise, unless we guard our tendency of attachment, unless we guard it deliberately, it has a tendency of growing ever more. And eventually, it could grow to such extent that it would be very difficult to restrain it. Oh, Bhikshuni Sujata. There was a Bhikshuni Sujata by name, the Tibetan name is Pamgamo, and she would complain when somebody says, practice. She would complain, no, I am fully preoccupied. I'm so much to do that I don't get time to practice. Then she's asked, what do you do? I ruminate. All throughout I ruminate on things that I want, on my enemies, on harming someone, on my families, relatives, on how I would extend my life, on how I plan for next 150 years. Not just next year, but 150 years from now. And what else? Yeah, and about family, etc. She said, I have so much. Every time, all the time, I'm busy doing something very important. Ruminating. Where is the time for me to practice? So in a way, that was not to reflect her own situation. She was meaning to point her younger ones to what could happen unless one takes a deliberate attempt in checking the mind. Otherwise, if it is let loose, it could just be found so busy one would hardly find any time in between. It would always have something. Skilled swordsman is the story that I shared last time. So basically it is saying that one has to be on guard through the tools of mindfulness and introspection. Otherwise, like in the case of a swordsman. By the way, this is a story where it says that there is a swordsman and an archer. Both of them decided to compete with each other, but only by being on the water in a boat. So all day, starting from the morning until evening, when they say, what is the expression you say? What is the expression when you say, this is for this day? This,
Just for today?
Yeah. Let's call it a day. Yeah, let's call it a day. So until they say, let's call it a day, they just keep on going. And then on one time, the archer was worried. When he came back home, he was worried. The wife asked, what's the matter? Today you look very different, worried, turned in. I have only so many arrows within me. Once I run out of it, he will take advantage of me. And I worry. He would outdo me, even kill me. At least he will, the sword, no. Yes, it was the archer. So who was worried? And so the wife said, oh, calm down, this is easy, I have a way. So what you do is, tomorrow, take me with you. So the boat is small, she had to really snuck herself. And while snucking, it so happened that she was hit behind the archer. So the swordsman didn't have any idea. So he kept throwing, with just few arrows left. And the archer was so good that he would just cut through everything, right? The swordsman. And eventually, the wife kind of popped up her head to the side. That got his attention. He got distracted. The archer, the swordsman was killed. And then the archer said, see, I got you. The swordsman in pain said, no, it was not you who got me. It was my distraction who got me. So that actually happens, right? When we are distracted, it gets us. From a small thing as locking oneself up, locking oneself out, to big things, losing so many things, right? Okay. Oh, so there's one with goatee on fire. Oh, we have someone here. I didn't mean to. I didn't know that you were coming. so no. So yeah, but one thing that I can give you an advice that could come really handy, that you have to be very, very mindful, that when you are making fire, you have to be very careful how close you go to blow it. Otherwise there's danger of getting this burn.
I'll remember that.
Yeah, please remember. Yeah, if it need be, just carry a tag. Comes like that. So what it is it says, if you are yourself not pure in your morality, filled with infractions or whatnot, first work on yourself. Don't rush in pointing at others' fault, because it could backfire and the damage could be even more than you could have inflicted on others. Okay. It's for sure now I can foresee I cannot finish. Okay. Okay, now next one. Yes, the ethics of virtue. Ethics of virtue, in the context of Bodhisattva, as I mentioned yesterday, in one sense, the practice of 6 Paramita, it is included in the in this container, in this basket, or in this category. And then it lists another 11, 12, situations under the ethics of altruism. So interesting. And then it makes the case of when you would incur the infraction, and that too, I don't know how to say it. In English, in Tibetan, it is nyomongchen maimba, which means you may incur an infraction, yet that may be afflicted or not unafflicted. And then there are cases when you wouldn't incur any infraction at all. But there can be the infraction which is uninflicted, and there could be an infraction which is afflicted. But nonetheless, it is a transgression. In the case the case of Bodhisattva, it is very interesting to study that and see how it is so it is so harmonious with a very basic criteria, very basic principle out of which all of this exposition is grounded. Yet at the same time, the sophistication, the complexity of the situation is captured in there. It is so beautiful. Okay, so next we have the virtue. Luckily, even in the scripture itself, there are not many metaphors there. In the others, I did selection. Not on any ground, except it's easy to convey and easy to understand. Some, there are archaic terms that I cannot even understand fully. Whereas in the case of ethics of virtue, that's all there is. So moisture that gathers and nurtures everything. So basically, what it is saying is that in the case of Bodhisattva, right? In the case of Bodhisattva, the ethic of virtue basically takes the form of being earnest and being fully engaged in always gathering the true accumulations, in always accumulating merit and accumulating wisdom. Just as moisture gathers things, kind of binds things together, and also nurtures plants and others. Likewise, this virtue, the ethics of virtue, should take the form of a very vibrant energy that is always up in gathering merits and gathering wisdom, because basically the 6 perfections are an extension of the two accumulations, and it's the accumulation in the form of merit and wisdom that builds the components of the path. One without the other would be incomplete, and the aspired for goal of full awakening can only come about when we make sure that the path that we travel has both of these components intact. And then the next one is, if we have, and then thus the emphasis here is to engage in love, compassion, bodhicitta, generosity, etc., but to the extent possible, pull in the wisdom part to have an equally important role in that, so that takes the role of refining the practice, and so it speaks of the combination of emptiness and compassion. Tongni Nyingje. You will find this expression Tongni Nyingje Sungdudeva means combination of emptiness and compassion, but in tantric context, the mention of compassion refers to not compassion per se, but to the subtlest clear light mind. Whereas in sutra levels, that refers to compassion together with love and all the method aspects of the path, so that the expression Tongni Nyingje, emptiness, compassion, emptiness, kind of conveys that idea of how to actually be able to move forth on the path. The combination is must. And that's very clear, right? Because the obstacles, no matter how strong one's compassion, love, and all other method aspects of practices may be, without the help of, without the component of wisdom, one could only go so far in dealing with the afflictions, succeed in suppressing them, succeed in weakening them, but never ever uprooting them, right? So that's the very idea behind that, even in the context of Bodhisattva also. And then the next is both eyes and foot intact. If someone has both the eye and foot intact, they can get anywhere they want, that too quite quickly. Likewise, there's this need of both developing both the wisdom and compassion, or wisdom and method. So here it is talking of how to see the six perfections in the light of being, in the light of being expansion, right? Expansion of the two accumulations, and thus engage in them, engage in them equally, rather than prefer some and totally neglect others. And that too, how we do that is to engage in the six perfections in such a way that when you engage in one particular perfection, you are actually pulling in all elements of all the six perfections. It's like the six perfections are never separated. They are kind of bound together. Everywhere they are, they go in groups. And to give an example, say if one is dealing with a particular situation, keeping oneself from being carried away by the attachment, etc., would be the practice of morality. But then doing it for the sake of sentient beings, and thus being very ready to even face any hardships in the way, is bringing in the element of fortitude. And then doing that delightfully, not by dragging one's heel, is bringing in the element of tsundi, joyous effort. By the way, tsundi, it is called joyous effort, but I think one thing that needs to be emphasized there is making joyous effort on virtues. We could be making joyous effort on non-virtues also. So in the scripture, that is the main point. Main defining point about joyous effort. Joyously making effort on keva, on virtue. So I don't know how to build that in, how to bring that in, but sometimes people just use perseverance, endurance, joyous effort, whatnot. But I keep saying, yes, the best shot is joyous effort, but still, people could be like saying, I'm joyously making effort. On what? Right? So that's going completely in the other direction. So joyously making effort in virtues, in positivities. That's what tsunji for joyous. That's what joyous effort is, not otherwise. And then when you do so, try to do so focusedly, and that's bringing in the concentration element. And then, yes, to the extent possible, bring in the perspective, the view of seeing everything that you engage in the light of being mere designation, in the light of being mere contingent on conditions. Not there, but there very clearly, but barely dependent on, barely contingent on conditions. We have to be very careful, and you all know, but by way of reminding, understanding emptiness has to be situated within an unquestioned acceptance of things being there dependently. If we could situate emptiness to the tone of seeing things being mere designated, yet at the same time being able to uphold that, or being able to kind of situate that with an undenied acceptance of dependently there, acceptance of being there, yes, albeit dependently only, then that will go a big way in making a big difference. So that's how you pull in all the six paramitas. So from now on, paramitas should always go together. It shouldn't be just morality and no others, right? So when we do that, then just about anything that we do, however trivial thing it may look, that would be a rich action, having the potential of leading us to full awakening. It wouldn't be the same ordinary, dry, just this action, but rather an action rich with all those elements imbued in it, embedded in that, and thus have potential. So this reminds us of what Dharma practice means. Dharma practice doesn't entail doing something different. It entails doing something differently, but not doing something necessarily different. There's a big difference between differently and different. So one could be doing the same thing but differently. If one cannot bring that touch of difference in how you do it, then no matter what you do, even in the name of Dharma, it may still be adharma, non-dharma. So there is no space, no area where we cannot bring Dharma. Basically, in a broad sense, it means knowing how things work, and be that in the negative sense, in the positive sense, kind of really getting to know the mechanism of how things go about. That's Dharma in a wider sense, the law of nature of how things work. And then in its more fine-tuned context, it means knowing how to, after having understood the mechanism of how things work, what leads to what, unmistakenly, etc., be that in the direction of negative or positive, then able to pull in or come up with as vibrant mechanism in addressing the negativity effectively, in knowing which part to pull, to deflate it, or in understanding how to augment positivity by knowing where the weaknesses are, making up for them, or by bringing in those elements. So that's with both eyes and foot intact. Wisdom and method together, yet at the same time, wisdom in its method in its all different forms for the convenience of kind of dealing with it in the 5 of the 6 perfections together with the wisdom together, and be able to kind of bring them together. Like the turkeys movie here, they all go together. Hardly you see one on its own. When they go together, there is a different strength there. And they can be alerted very easily to danger. If somebody misses it, others will detect it, etc., etc. And if they have to really desperately charge someone, all the three would be much stronger. Particularly if you had to charge me, I would be on the ground. Oh yeah, I would have no choice but to run away. It really emphasizes to be able to exercise the 6 parameters. And you may also know, in the scriptures itself, it says, what do you call, advises to practice the 6 parameters in group. So much so that there is this expression of 6 parameters of each parameter, right? So there is this generosity of morality, fortitude of morality, like that, and likewise for the others. And the way to do that is how we just touched on. Burning fire doesn't know any difference, come whatever in its way, it'll just consume it. Take the case of volcano outbursts. Oh, nothing escapes it. Everything in its way. So is the case with afflictions. It just knows destruction, nothing constructive. And the way to deal with them is by wielding these weapons, these positive weapons of 6 paramitas. Each can deal a death blow to individual negative afflicted emotion. Yes, last, wingless bird. Yeah, basically it is stressing again the same point of how the method and wisdom component needs to be equally attended to, equally built. Otherwise it would end up like that of a bird without wing. But instead, if the bird has, so that we could stop with a good note, but instead, if the bird has both the wings and very strong wings, it can fly wherever it likes, can fly freely. Likewise, attending to all the method and wisdom aspect equally together is how we traverse the path to enlightenment.